Thank you. Can everybody hear me? You hear me okay? Cool. Yeah, so I'm gonna get to my title slide here. Yeah, so I'm Kasey. If you don't know me, I'm out of the Baldwin office. I cover St. Croix, Pierce, and Western Dunn counties. I've been here since about 2018. Um, and first and foremost, I just want to thank my crew that I had last year. The two on the far corners are my two LTEs that I've had since 2021 and 2022. And then the middle one was our intern last year, Braden Coombe. And I had a really great crew, and I forgot to mention their names, Sam Jacobson and Dustin Scher. Very thankful for them. So everything that you're going to see today is due to our collective work. So I just want to thank them. And then I'm going to talk about a bunch of things tonight. First off, I'm going to talk about our feral brook trout stocking program, and we did an evaluation of that throughout the past couple years. It's super cool. And then I'll talk about the status of the Rush, the Kinney, and the Willow. And then we also did a watershed survey on the Trimble River and Big River last year in 2025. So I'll talk about some of the results that we got out of that survey. And then I've got a Pierce County regulation change that will be going into effect in 2026. So I'll talk about that. And then I'll end it with a really cool habitat project that our habitat crew worked on, and they finished up last year on the north branch of Wilson Creek. Um, so I'll finish with that, and that's just Braden Coombe. He was our intern, as I mentioned last year, with a really nice brown. Can anybody guess by the picture how big that brown trout is? Yeah. 161. It's a great guess. That one was 27 inches. We actually have a pit tag in that fish now. We'll see if we get it again, but we've caught it 2 years in a row in the same spot. So super cool stuff. But first off, not to distract everybody with that fish, but I'm going to talk about our feral brook trout stocking program. The Wisconsin DNR in general, we produce two strains of brook trout in our hatcheries, the domestic strain and then feral strain. But within the feral strain, there's a couple different, um, I guess, sub-strains. We have the Northwest and the Southwest feral. So basically, the domestic strain, those are fish that have been propagated in the hatchery for decades and decades. And they're mostly stocked for put and take opportunities. We don't see a lot of natural reproduction out of those fish, but they grow well and they provide good fisheries, especially in like urban situations. And then we also produce our ferals. So the ferals, our hatcheries come and collect eggs in the field, out of whatever stream it may be. We actually have two of those streams that we get feral strain brook trout from in my management area. So the South Fork of the Hay River is one of them. And then Katy Creek is another one of those streams. And those are streams that have really good wild strain genetics. That's why they were chosen, and they're relatively high density, so the population can withstand eggs being taken annually. So basically, those eggs that they take those back to the hatchery and they let those fish grow up, and those are the brood stock fish. And then out of those fish, they'll produce two generations. And then those fish will go out into the state to be stocked into wild waters. So those stockings are generally for restoration. So you're trying to restore a brook trout population, rehabilitation, or maintaining a population. Those are the three main reasons why we stock those ferals. So feral stocking in the northern driftless within my management area has occurred in three streams on the map here. Upper Galle River, Lower Pine Creek, and Big River. And I'm going to get into a little bit of each one of those. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Upper Galle. So this is the portion of the river that is above the lake. You can see on the map here. It's the blue line. Oh, that's not my pointer. There's my pointer. Oh, I was going the wrong way. Here we go. Pointer. So this portion of the stream, the lake's right here. This is the town of Spring Valley right here. It's in St. Croix County. It's separated from the lower river by the impoundment. It does have some thermal issues, but it's got really excellent brook trout or trout habitat in general. Um, Here we go. So those, you don't have to pay too much attention to this graph, but we did have a temperature logger in this part of the stream just to see what kind of thermals were present with the brook trout population. So it is fairly warm. 12% of our temperatures were above 68 degrees. Our mean July temp was 66. Pretty darn warm. It gets up to well into the low 70s at some points. So we do have this issue going on, but we have been stocking trout in this portion of the river for a really long time. Our database only goes back to 1972. That's why you only see the farthest date back to 1972. But historically, we were putting brown trout in this stream all the way up until 2011. And that fishery was basically only sustaining on the stocking. Those fish were not naturally reproducing well enough to maintain their population, so we were stocking it annually. Brook trout started stocking those in this area in 2001. Those were domestic, so the blue is the domestic strain that I mentioned. And then the orange and the yellow and the gray are all the ferals. They're just different sizes of fish that we were putting in. So that stocking strain got changed to the ferals in 2017, and we've been stocking those ever since. So this is the Upper Galle. It's a beautiful part of the stream, super scenic. It's hard to get to. There's not a lot of access, but it is got some really nice bluffs and bluff pools, really good habitat too. So a little bit about how the fishery responded to our feral strain stocking. So pre-feral strain stocking, we were getting 0 young of year or juvenile trout, meaning there was no natural reproduction of brook trout. That's in our surveys prior to that stocking. After we started stocking, for the 3 years that we've been monitoring this, we are averaging about 500 young of year per mile, which is really good. It's in the 90th percentile for catch rates of young of year or juvenile fish. And those are all naturally reproduced fish. Because we know the sizes of fish that we're putting in. We're putting in fall fingerlings and then broodstock size fish. So any fish we get in our survey that's less than 5.5 inches, we know that fish was the result of natural reproduction based on us knowing when the fish get stocked. So 500 young of year per mile, that's the average between these 3 years. And this graph just kind of depicts that. So this is just catch rates throughout the years. And then these 3 last years here, 2019, 24, and 25, are the surveys that occurred after that feral strain stocking occurred. So we're getting a really good naturally reproducing fishery out of stocking these feral strain brook trout. I did want to throw in, we did surveys on a control stream, Lousy Creek. It's not lousy at all, if you can see by the picture. It's actually a brook trout reserve stream, and it has a really good brook trout population. It's a class 1 stream, but we monitored it for a couple of years during the same time we were monitoring the Upper Galle, and we kind of saw the same trends. We saw this increase in natural reproduction of brook trout here as well. So even though we're getting this good return off of our stocked fish in the Upper Galle, we're also seeing increases in Lousy Creek that's not stocked. So we know, yes, the stocking was successful, but there's something going on in the watershed where it's improving conditions for trout because we're seeing this increase in natural production, if that makes sense. So that's my first example of our feral brook trout stocking. My second one is Lower Pine Creek. It's in Dunn County, the far northeastern corner of Dunn County. You can kind of see that a little bit in this little map here. It's a class 2 and class 3 water, which is denoted by the light blue is class 2, the dark blue is class 3. It's a very different type of stream. It's a very low gradient sand dominated stream. And it's just a tag alder corridor. It looks very different from what we just saw in the Upper Galle. So here in this case, we were stocking about 200 domestic brook trout yearlings from 2007 to 2016. And same kind of deal here. We started stocking the feral strain in 2017 up to 2022. And then the results from our monitoring, our evaluation of that stocking change. So we surveyed 2 stations here in 2001 we were getting zero young of year per mile, so no natural reproduction at that point. Very low adult densities, 34 a mile. That's next to nothing. So in our surveys in 2018 and 2023, which are these surveys here that you see, this is just different size classes of fish. So total trout per mile, young of year is the juveniles is the green, and then the adults are purple, and this is catch rates by year. So after that stocking strain change, we were actually picking up a decent catch rates of young of year. So about 184 per mile of young of year, and we were getting about 200 fish per mile of adults, which is pretty darn good for the type of stream that this is. So some good returns on this stocking as well, and some natural reproduction of brook trout. So the control stream for this stream, I used Otter Creek. It's in an adjacent watershed. It has no stocking history. It's never been stocked. Minimal evidence of natural reproduction in the past and recent survey history. So we surveyed this. This is a different type of table, 1993 all the way up to 2019, not consecutive years. But this monitoring occurred at the same time that the pre and post monitoring of lower pine occurred. And you can see here, we really never picked up any young of year to speak of. We didn't see any increases in natural reproduction or increases in the adult densities here either. So, or here at all. So in this case, we can say like, yes, our stocking basically is driving the population in Lower Pine Creek to naturally reproduce, and it's having this population that can sustain itself, basically. And then the last stream I'm going to talk about for this evaluation is Big River. Some of you may have fished it. It's in Pierce County, just south of Prescott. It's a class 1 and class 2 brown trout stream. It's a coulee type stream, northern part of the Driftless Area. Just a couple pictures here. It's pretty high gradient. It does have a pretty big sand load coming down from upstream sources, but overall, it's really good trout habitat. And in here, this is the stocking history, so not much of a stocking history at all. We did put domestic brook trout in here for a couple years in the early 90s. Those fish basically did not take. They didn't produce a fishery. They didn't start to naturally produce. It was only 2 years, but it didn't take. So we started putting feral strain brook trout in here in 2018, 21, and 22. And then this is basically the results of that. So prior to 2022, prior to that stocking, no surveys showed any young of year brook trout or any adult brook trout for that matter at this location. So the orange line is brown trout and the gray line down there on the end is brook trout. And you can see we started picking up some brook trout in 2022, and their numbers really increased and they've kind of leveled off. But now we have just about as many brook trout as we have brown trout at this location. And then here, just to dive a little bit more into that, brown trout young of year here on this graph on the left, and brown trout adults on the right. And this is at our trend site that we survey every year. So you can see in general, Big River produces this relatively low density brown trout fishery with some natural reproduction. This is brown trout right here. And then if you go look at the brook trout, this is just teasing apart the young of year and the adults on the right graph. So the young of year, you can see in our 2025 survey, this is at multiple locations. Each dot represents a different location, each color. And you can see we were getting young of year brook trout at all of the survey sites that we surveyed. And then in adults over here too, we're getting pretty good increases in densities of adults as well. So at the average of all those sites, we're getting about 250 young of year per mile. So it's kind of crazy. Big River is one of those streams where it's got this dominant brown trout population, and in most every other case, we're seeing brown trout overtake brook trout populations, and we're losing our brook trout. And if you ask me which stream I thought would produce a brook trout population, Big River would probably be one of the last ones that I would choose, just because of all of these other streams showing us the opposite, brown trout increasing, brook trout declining. And this is just our typical coulee type stream where that occurrence is so common. Brown trout just do really well in that type of habitat and that type of stream. So it's crazy to me that Big River is yielding those results with these brook trout increases. So it's really cool to see three different types of streams that are responding like this to our feral brook trout stocking. But basically, we've shown, it has been successful. It's established natural reproduction. It's establishing these sustainable populations that we no longer have to stock. I'm not stocking Big River anymore. Not stocking the Upper Galle anymore. But like I mentioned with the Upper Galle, the success has probably been influenced by some environmental variables, whether that be increases in base flow, just improvements in the habitat or watershed improvements, land use, runoff, all of that kind of stuff. So in the Upper Galle's case, I think that was going on. Yes, the stocking was successful, but I think it occurred at the right time where conditions were improving, like we saw with Lousy Creek. And it's been successful in all of these varying stream types. All the streams that I just showed you are very different and in very different areas. So yeah, the feral strain of brook trout, the stocking has proven to be pretty successful. So that's what I had for feral brook trout. I'm going to move into our normal stream surveys that I normally talk to you guys about and just give you updates on the main ones that we survey. So the Rush River, I'll start off with just a couple of sampling pictures there. So I'm going to start off with our Stonehammer trend site. This is at 690th. If you guys aren't familiar, basically between El Paso and Martel. But this is our long-term trend site here. So you can see we've got data going back to the year 2000 all the way up to 2025. And this is fish per mile. And the different lines, again, just represent different size classes. So it's total fish per mile, young of year is the dotted, and then the adults are the dashed. So you can see pretty average year this last year, 2025. Some good natural reproduction, but everything was pretty average. And then the gray line here is the 90th percentile for total fish per mile. And you can see we are well above that basically every year. Very high densities, again, and I say that every year, but very high densities of brown trout. Total fish per mile was about around the 5,500, 5,700 mark there. If you're wondering where the big fish are, they are here. Stonehammer is doing really well. The number of fish over 12 inches per mile is on this right graph here. So the red line is the 90th percentile, and you can see, we're well above that mark every year. So even though we have these high densities, there's a lot of really nice fish out there still. So we were over the 300 fish per mile mark just in the fish over 12 inches at Stonehammer. Moving downstream to Vino Valley, our other trend site that we survey every year, same deal here. You can see total young of year and adults. Adults is the orange line if you look at that. So it trended up a little bit last year, but overall, if you look at the grand scheme of things, pretty average compared to the historic surveys at this location. Lower densities here, if you're paying attention to this y-axis here. I'll back up. You can see we're sitting around 5,500 per mile at Stonehammer. And then here, we're sitting about 2,500 fish per mile. So lower densities, but we do have more larger fish at this location. So 90th percentile of fish over 12 inches is the red again. And you can see we're sitting at about 550 brown trout per mile over the 12-inch mark here. So a little bit better size structure here with the lower densities. And just a few big fish pictures because everybody loves those, including myself. So I was just gonna throw a few of these in just because everybody likes to see those. Moving on to the Kinney, we survey the Kinney in 2 locations every year as well. The first one I'm going to talk about is I call it the Aldi's trend site. It's right at Aldi's in River Falls. And we have another trend site in the lower river below the two dams at Glen Park. So this one's the Aldi site. Same kind of deal as the Rush River here with the different size classes. And then the 90th percentile for total fish per mile is the red. Comparing that to the orange, we're well above that every year. This year we were about 5,000 per mile total brown trout. And then if you look over here, it's kind of a different story than the Rush. The red line is the 90th percentile, and we usually don't hit that at this location. It's about 130 fish per mile for fish over 12 inches here, but it still, produces some great fish. But it's just this the densities are so high, the size structure is a little bit more limited here. But we have been trending up, since about 2021. We've had pretty significant increase in fish over 12 inches at this location here. Going downstream to the lower river, this is in Glen Park in River Falls. And similar deal here, total trout per mile is the orange, compared that to the 90th percentile. We jumped back up the last couple years to about 4,000 fish per mile. So back up to pretty high densities after we kind of had a low for several years after that dam was notched. So things are improving a little bit here in terms of densities. And our fish over 12 inches at this location, our size structure has been a lot better since we've had this drop in densities. So we have fewer fish um, um, able to take advantage of the resources that are present, basically. So they grow faster, they're in better condition because there's less of them. So that's the trend we've kind of seen for these last few years. So we've seen a pretty big increase in fish per mile over 12 inches. And this last year was pretty good too. We're just over 300 fish per mile over that 12-inch mark, which is well above the 90th percentile there. And just some big fish from the Kinney, because we all love those. That's my boss. Just some really nice fish. Yeah, it's great. Big heavy fish too. I mean, sometimes we run into one of those. So moving on to the Willow, I'm going to talk about the Willow. I don't talk about it as much, obviously, as the Kinney or the Rush, but it is a nice river as well, and we stock it a lot. It's in St. Croix County, if you guys aren't familiar. It's pretty long. It's about 43 miles long. It's a large trout stream as well. Similar in size, maybe a little bit bigger than the Rush. 40 feet average stream width, trib to the St. Croix. It's a class 2 and class 3. It does have some smallmouth bass water as well. It's warmer, hence the class 2 and the class 3. We do stock it with brown trout and rainbow trout. And depending where you are on the river, you could have the opportunity to catch all three species because there are brook trout in some of the tributaries as well. We do stock it with brood stock rainbows. So those fish are going in at an average of 18 inches when we stock them. So yeah, a really good opportunity there. Like I said, though, it is thermally challenged. It does have several dams on it, and a more limited connection to springs, basically. And this map is horrible, but this is this is the Willow River right here in the middle with the St. Croix, and then Hudson. Well, here's 94 here, so it's just north of the Kinney, basically. So we survey the Willow every year. We call it the Race Branch. It's at Trout Brook Road below the state park. And this stream is reliant on stocking, or it has been historically. So this is fish per mile. The total is the light blue, young of year, or well, not naturally reproduced in some years, depending on the stocking. But the blue line is young of year, and then the orange line is adults. And you can see here, we've had some really big increases in young of year. And these young of year in these last couple years are naturally reproduced. They're the result of natural reproduction. We've been stocking feral strain brown trout in this portion of the river, and these fish have been doing really well the past couple years. There was the dam in Willow River State Park that was rebuilt in 2020. And since then, we have been seeing some impacts to the thermals, but we've also been seeing this increase in natural reproduction, which I think the dam is basically maintaining more stable, more preferable water temperatures in the winter while eggs are incubating. So we're having this increase in natural reproduction because of that, but it does get really warm in the summer. So I guess we can't have everything here, but we are seeing some pretty good increases in the brown trout here. And these are just a few pictures. This is my LTE Sam that I mentioned in the beginning. He lives there. And these are the broodstock rainbows that we put in. So some pretty nice fish here that have a good opportunity for anglers. And yeah, so now I'm going to talk about kind of dive a little bit into the Trimble River. We did a watershed survey here in 2025. I have 2026. It's supposed to be 2025. So basically what a watershed survey is, we comprehensively surveyed the entire watershed, so the main stem and all of its tributaries, to get a good look at what's going on and how the tributaries are influencing the main river and vice versa. So we surveyed 40 stations in this watershed, so including the main stem and then Goose Creek, Spring Creek, Little Trimble, and then several unnamed tributaries as well. So this is just some stocking history of the Trimble. If you're not familiar, historically, it's been a brown trout stocked stream for a really long time. Going back into the 70s and likely before then. The orange line over here is the Little Trimble. It's been stocked as well, and then stocking stopped here in 1990, and then we've stocked the Trimble ever since, although stocking has gone down quite a bit since its peak back in like the 1990s. That was brown trout. The brook trout stocking here is on the right, so each different color line represents a different stream in the watershed that was stocked, but a little bit of brook trout stocking here and there in all of the tributaries in the main stem. So this is basically a culmination of what we found in our trend site in this survey and in all the previous historical surveys. So this is catch rates. This is just young of year, so juvenile brown trout. And you can see here, if you're just looking at the big picture, things have basically trended up. You know, things are trending up into 2025, where we kind of saw a huge peak here, but we're still at very high rates of natural reproduction relative to the past. So brown trout natural reproduction has really increased in the Trimble River watershed, you know, since the 1990s. Things have been doing really well. Adult trends, kind of the same thing. Everything's trending upward, and now we have some of the highest densities that we've seen in the Trimble. And I should mention too, for this, in preparation for this watershed survey, I stopped stocking the Trimble in 2022 so that when we do our watershed survey, we can fully evaluate if fish are naturally reproducing. So we're not having any confusion between the stocked fish and the naturally reproduced fish. So all of these that you see here in the 2025 survey are naturally reproduced fish. So it hasn't been stocked for 3 years prior to this survey. And this is just a map. You can think of it as a heat map. So the orange is adults, and then the yellow dots are young of year. So if you're wondering where to go fish, where the higher densities of fish are, you really can't go wrong. There's good densities of brown trout basically throughout the Trimble, whether you go south of 10 or just south of River Falls there as well. There's good numbers of trout basically everywhere you go. The Little Trimble is this tributary. It's a class 1. It holds some good densities of brown trout as well. And natural reproduction too. If you're just looking at the yellow dots, we've got some really high rates of natural reproduction throughout there of brown trout. Looking at brook trout, much more limited. I'm not talking about the bigger. We did survey the Big River watershed as well, but I'm just kind of focusing on the Trimble. But young of year is the green, and then orange is adults. And you can see, most of our brook trout are mainly concentrated in the upper portions of the main stem, and then in the tributaries, Goose Creek and Spring Creek, and a little bit of the Little Trimble. The Little Trimble is another one of those streams where we've seen brook trout really decline and brown trout really increase. in there as well. So yeah, good numbers of brook trout, but they have been declining pretty much across the map, but especially in the Little Trim Bell. But yeah, the Trim Bell overall is, ma mainly a brown trout dominated stream. Now I'm going to transition to a little bit different topic here. So I mentioned at the beginning, Pierce County has undergone a regulation change for all of its basically all of its trout waters. So this regulation change that I'll talk about influences all of these streams that you see in red, including the Kinney. So the Rush, Plum, Isabel, Cave Creek, Big River, Galle, and it, like I said, it does include the Kinney into St. Croix County. It does not include Katy or Pine Creek. Those are streams that have regulations to protect brook trout and focus harvest on brown trout. But the regulation, so prior to this, well, currently it is, except it's only catch and release right now, is a 3 fish bag limit, browns over 12, brooks over 8. It's been like that since I think 1990, if I remember correctly. And that regulation was basically no longer appropriate for these streams because as you guys have seen, we have these very high brown trout density streams, a limited size structure. So the vast majority of fish, in a lot of cases, over 90% of the fish that we get in these streams are less than 12 inches. So basically, in order to focus any angler's harvest, on those smaller fish, if we want to thin those out a little bit, if harvest can do that, we want to focus harvest on those small, very overabundant fish to try to reach that goal and improve the size structure and growth rates. So the regulation starting in 2026 will be a little bit of increased bag limit. It'll go through from 3 to 5, and then it'll be basically the opposite of what the regulation was. So prior to this, you could keep browns over 12. Now you can only keep browns under 12, except you can keep one over. So it's a one over. So you can keep 5 fish under 12 and one may be over 12 inches. So basically this regulation, like I mentioned, it's going to focus any harvest that does occur on those overabundant fish and then still allow anglers to keep, a trophy fish, or if they just want to add 1 over 12 to their bag limit. So the Kinney is very similar to this regulation. The Kinney right now is 5 fish under 12. And this will just add the 1 over to the Kinney as well. I included the Kinney just to keep things simpler, more consistent. So like I mentioned, it'll hopefully promote harvest if enough people keep fish of these overabundant small fish. It'll also afford more protection to larger fish over 12 inches that are more rare in the population, and hopefully promote quality or trophy potential. And that is all I had for that. But basically, our regulation booklets haven't come out yet. They'll come out right before April. And also in Wisconsin, if you guys didn't know, I should mention that too. Our harvest season is going to start the first Saturday in April rather than the first Saturday in May. That's new this year. So yeah, if you want to harvest trout, the opener is the first Saturday in April. And now I'm going to move on to the last topic that I'm going to talk about today. So our North Branch of Wilson, it's a relatively, I guess, different type of restoration than what we normally do. So this is on North Branch of Wilson Creek. This is in Dunn County. Menominee is right here. Eau Claire is right here. So just northwest of Menominee. And this stream was in pretty rough shape. It is a class 1 brook trout stream. It's a tributary to Wilson Creek. But this site in particular, we have a stream bank easement on this property, and it was in really rough shape. A ton of sedimentation, a lot of beaver activity. You can see here, which resulted in some of that sedimentation. We had some bank failure, habitat loss, a lot of agricultural impacts, some bridges and culverts to deal with. And then you can see in this picture, and you'll see in some of these other pictures, this stream was ditched or channelized back in the 1930s. So it was straight as an arrow. no habitat, featureless. So a lot of resource concerns here. And with the habitat concerns, we also had concerns about the fishery. So I did a watershed survey in 2024, and we also had 3 years of pre-project monitoring of the fishery at this site. And then 2026 will be our first year to measure all of these variables after the project's been completed because it was completed last year. So this is a result of our watershed survey, excuse me. So you can see these are different locations on the North Branch of Wilson, from downstream most to upstream most at Station 7. And you can see total trout per mile here and young of year. So this red box is where the project is. So you can see we had our lowest brook trout densities at this site, no natural reproduction. Um, and if you move up here, fish over 10 inches, it had none, even though upstream and downstream locations contained fish that large. But the young of year, I mean, it's in a location within the watershed and on the stream where it should have some natural reproduction, and we have not found any in all the years that we've surveyed this site. So pretty limited fishery because of the habitat that's present there. And this is just an aerial image. So you can see this is a driveway. We have our easement upstream and downstream of the driveway, but this is the section they worked on last year, and it's straight as an arrow. No sinuosity at all. Just nothing going on. And it's the same thing upstream too, which they're working on this coming field season. So, and this is just a few more pictures, shallow, sandy, wide, not much habitat. That's how it was throughout. So to restore this section of stream, we wanted to bring back some sinuosity, install some meanders back in the stream. So we went and looked at the historical aerial images of this site pre channelization or pre ditching. And this blue line here is where the stream was before it was ditched back in the 1930s. We did have to alter it a little bit because of the landowners' concerns, because we do have an easement. The easement follows the stream. So we had some concerns there. The landowner actually ended up getting a lot more land in the easement because of the restored sinuosity. So we had to work around a couple things, but basically we were trying to restore it to its original channel. A few pictures here. This was just such a different habitat project than what we normally do. So they had to dig the new channel first, and then at the right point in time, they notched the stream to where it could start flowing into the new channel. And then after a few hours, the old channel began to dry up, the water levels went down, and then they backfilled that in. And it looks really raw at this point, but this was the process of what they did here. And this was after they sloped the banks back. They gave it some time to let the stream cut its way. And then they ended up sloping the banks back like we do on our normal projects. Installed some habitat, some bank boulders, root wads. They've got some weirs in there as well. And then this is after the habitat is all installed, the banks are sloped. And then we finished that up and seeded and mulched it. We're planning to plant trees at this site this coming year, but we did seed it with some native warm season grasses and forbs as well. And this is what it looks like. I do have drone footage of this. I didn't want to include that just because it's tough to get a video to work sometimes, but this is the pre-aerial with the straight, and then you can see the new stream in the new channel, or well, the original channel here with the restored meanders. So a super cool project. We're planning on doing another one of that type of project on Mines Creek, which is a trip to the Galle River in a couple years. Really cool stuff. But that's all I had for you guys, and I'll leave you guys with a picture of a timber rattler that we ran into last year. Just super cool. So yeah, thank you guys. I'll take any questions you have.
Where's my, oh, sorry.
Oh, you're good. The microphone. Yeah, anybody got any questions about anything? Oh, yeah.
Quiz.
Yes, quiz.
I've got, so Brian gave me 2 additional prize here to give tonight, but I just don't want to give these away. So I was listening to Kasey's presentation and I prepared some questions. And let's see if you guys paid attention. So I'm going to ask the question, and whoever answered the question right, and she will be the judge, you'll get one of the prize. So the first question is, what will change in the trout regulation in Pierce County in 2026? So raise your hand if you got the answer. Okay. What's the
Changing the tagline.
Yeah, well, then,
Yeah,
well,
because
the new
you
regulation.
can only get the prize if you say it correctly.
All right, we're going from 1 kept over 12, 5 instead of 3 on the harvest.
Yep, got it.
Got it?
Yep, 1/12 and 5/7. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, I've got another
Yep.
question.
1/4.
So what stream will convert from brown trout to brook trout?
Yeah, what stream did convert from brown trout to brook trout, or is converting from brown trout to brook trout?
Right over there?
The big river.
Yeah, got it.
Big River, wow.
Big
Okay,
River. Yeah.
excellent.
Cool. People were paying
Congrats.
attention. That's great.
Okay, so we'll start with the question. Thank you for paying attention. So
Yeah.
pays to pay attention. So we'll start with the question for Kasey. So we'll start with the questions in the room. So, and the thing is that I need to bring you the microphone because otherwise the folks online won't hear the question. And then after that, after we field the questions in the room, then Bob will take the questions online. So question back there?
Kasey, is the feral stocking being done in other districts? And if so, with equal success?
Yes, it has been done in other districts. I don't know about the success. So like the evaluation that I did was just something that I kind of undertook myself. So I don't know, how many like full evaluations there have been in other parts of the state. But yeah, I know throughout the Driftless, all the way down to Madison, the stocking strain changes to the Southwest ferals. And I don't know, about that, but yeah, it has been stocked in others too. Yeah.
Other
Good
questions
question.
in the room?
Yeah, question right here. Oh, yeah, there.
When you guys do your river surveys, what are the other species of fish do you find? I saw a smallmouth and a sturgeon, a catfish. What else is out there?
Just in trout streams or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in our trout streams, yeah, a few smallmouth here and there, depending on where you are. Pike, we get pike occasionally. So the cold water species that we run into all the time are mottled sculpin. We get brook lampreys, brook stickleback. Those are all really small. People consider them forage fish, but mottled sculpin are the ones we see in all of our cold water streams that, are indicators of really good cold water. White suckers, we see those a lot. And then randomly we'll run into just kind of species and you're like, what the heck is this doing here? Like a yellow perch or a bluegill will be like randomly here or there. Burbot is one really cool species we see in like a handful of streams. Like we'll get them in the Trimble, we'll get them in Plum Creek, South Fork of the Hay, and a couple other Dunn County streams, but we'll see burbot. They're usually about this big. So it's pretty cool. Red horse, we'll see a red horse we get in the Kinney. Yep, the lower rush. Yep, for sure. Yeah, depending on where you are, like how close you are to the Mississippi or the St. Croix, you never know what you're gonna see. So yeah, those are the main ones that we see a lot. Yeah, good question.
How do weather patterns affect natural reproduction?
Yes, everything. Yeah, the question was how do weather patterns affect natural production? Yeah, so when we get really high rain events in the spring, depending on the timing of those, it could be really detrimental for hatching success, or fry success too. So if those come when the eggs are still in the gravel and it's a really eroding, like high velocity event, we could see really huge impacts to that year class. Or if we have a relatively stable spring, when we have those stable springs, or even when we don't get a high water event until well after the trout have hatched, that's when we'll see like huge year classes of brown trout, brook trout. The last like huge crazy year class was in 2020, and then 2015. Like seems like every 5 to 7 years we have just these crazy spikes in natural reproduction. But yeah, weather's everything. Yeah, when we get those high water events, it can be good or bad.
Snowpack too, no?
Yeah, if we have a lot of snowpack, and depending on like how quickly that melts, if it's really fast and things warm up really quick, we'll have flood events, and if that happens before things have emerged, then we'll see some pretty bad impacts. Yeah. Yeah, question over there. Yeah. Real quick, Randy reminded me, he mentioned his work days earlier. I usually try to go to 1 or 2 work days every year, but him and his crew do a great job. They do so much work for us that we can't do ourselves. So many of our properties are in pretty rough shape, especially on the Kinney. They've had brushing maybe 20, 30 years ago, and they've been let go. And all of that is just grown up in invasive species, basically buckthorn, honeysuckle, box elders. So Randy and his crew, yes, they're making the stream more fishable, which is great. They're improving fishability, but they're also improving the health of the riparian corridor. So by taking these invasive species out, we do come back and maintain those. Randy and his crew, or our crew, will go back in and foliar spray the following years to spray any seedlings of buckthorn or anything else that comes up. So we're trying to maintain these kind of for the long term. So yeah, if you guys come over and help Randy, it's doing the streams a huge favor in maintaining the health of the riparian corridors too, and making them more fishable. So yeah, Randy's work days, they're fun. You get hot dogs, you get cookies, and a bonfire at the end. So it's good. It's fun stuff.
Yeah, the question I had to do with the dam removal on the Kinney.
Yeah.
It's been a couple of years now. Have you noticed any significant improvements since then?
Yeah, so like I mentioned in that one slide, initially after that dam was basically notched, we saw trout numbers really plummet. And that was due to all the sedimentation that had filled in a lot of the big pools, covered up some spawning habitat in that lower river. And now, like I showed in that one slide, for the past couple years, things have really rebounded. So the fishery is kind of coming back. Things are scouring out a little bit. Some of the sedimentation is gone now because of some flood events. So yeah, things are really basically almost back to where they were prior to that happening. So yeah, a lot of natural production and back to like really high densities of fish with still some nice fish down there. So yeah, it's basically back to where it was. You can still see the like visually, the habitat isn't what it was. There's still some really long stretches of some pretty featureless water. But the fishery where we have surveyed is back to pretty much where it was.
More question? We're gonna take one more, then we'll go online after.
Okay.
Taking note the whole time?
Awesome.
Wow.
That's great.
Yeah, I was wondering about the sulfur hatch. Now, I know that we had a presentation about that, studying that on the Kinney. And do you have anything that's different about it, or is it down? Or I thought it was down the last time I fished 15 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, that is a great question, but not one that I can answer. So We have our water resources staff out of Eau Claire. They do all of the macroinvertebrate sampling in our area, as well as Kayaptowitch. They have some volunteers that do that as well. So I cannot answer that question. I don't have that data, but I can refer you to someone that does, if that works for you.
One more, what about the taking out of the other dam, the higher dam on the Kinney? I went to a meeting in River Falls, but I don't remember exactly. What is the status of that now?
Yeah, so the Army Corps, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they are still in the process of approving the feasibility study. So it's basically been delayed until they can approve that study. I think they're shooting for like mid 2030s for that dam removal. So yeah.
Okay, so we'll take a couple of questions online, then we'll come back in the room, see if there's any more questions. So Bob, do you have anything? Any people ask some questions online?
Yeah, we have a lot of questions. I hope I'm not speaking too loud because I understand sometimes when I speak, I sound like Trout Jesus. Is it okay?
No, like this is just perfect.
Okay, perfect. So the first question is from Ed Constantini, and he wants to know how long it takes. He wants to know how long it takes for trout to repopulate a section of a stream that has been restored.
Oh, yeah. Good question. Very quickly. We can survey it the year that the project is done, that say like a habitat restoration, we'll survey it that year. There'll already be trout in there. Basically like our trout habitat crew, like the day they're moving the equipment out, they already see fish in there. But those are fish, that are coming from upstream and downstream locations, filling that section back in. But basically that next year, we'll see really comparable numbers to the rest of the sections of the stream, upstream and downstream, with some natural reproduction. So it's very quick. Trout colonize and establish very quickly. We do survey our habitat restorations 5 years out after the project has ended. And at that 5-year point, that's basically likely what you're going to see like after the population has stabilized. That's what you're going to see more long term. So yeah, very quickly they can recolonize. And like I mentioned with the Kinney, after that dam was notched and we had that sedimentation, yes, trout are sensitive to changes in habitat and their environment, but they can rebound very quickly. I think they're a lot more resilient than a lot of people think. So yeah, they can handle some pretty quick stuff, and they're so fecund and they grow so fast and they have fast generation times. If their population takes a hit, they can rebound like pretty fast. So yeah, very quickly is the short answer to your question.
Okay, great. Next question is from Delbert Trout. And he wants to know that if the brushing work, removing trees and cover along the side of creeks will help to stabilize water temperatures or make water temperatures worse. Understands that it makes fly fishing access easier, but most of those streams have open fields now.
Yeah, it depends on the stream. And in a lot of these streams that we take the brush or the trees off of, like when we do our trout habitat projects, we have to just to get the heavy equipment in there and for them to be able to work. And the majority of stream corridors that we're working on in our trout habitat projects are full of invasive species. A lot of the streams were previously grazed. Then, small farms went away. They took the cows off the stream. That grew up into box elders because they're early successional. And then we have these horrible stream banks because box elders have these such shallow root systems and they're constantly tipping over into the stream. And then we have erosion going on down, down, down. So that's, another reason why we take a lot of the trees off of our projects when we do the projects, and just for the heavy equipment to be able to work. But yes, you can see impacts to water temperatures when we take the trees out. And that's more pronounced on larger streams because they have more surface area. Whereas like on a small stream, there's a couple of scientific papers out there on streams that are less than 3 meters wide or 3 yards wide. Grass cover can almost have the same shading effects that a tree canopy have when you have that small stream. So we're not as concerned on smaller streams as we are on larger streams that, like I mentioned, the Willow, it's already really warm. So some streams are more thermally resilient than others, depending on the springs and groundwater connection than others. So on some more slightly thermally challenged, we would be really concerned. And we have been planting trees on our trout habitat projects. Since 2021, we started this new program where we've been buying really large seedlings, so like 6 to 8 foot tall seedlings are like 5 years old, and getting those planted on the stream corridor to get shade established more quickly using tree protection and all that kind of stuff on streams that we know are probably going to have problems in the next 20 to 30 years. So we are thinking about that, but yeah, it can have an impact, and it does. I know Kent Johnson with Kayaktuish, he's done a lot of temperature monitoring, and he's showed that with his monitoring that when we take that canopy cover off on some streams, it can have some pretty big impacts to the thermals. So we're definitely cognizant of that, and we're trying to take steps to combat that. So yeah, good question.
Okay, just a quick follow-up question. What are the species of trees that you plant now in the riparian areas?
Yeah, so we use a lot of swamp white oak. Those have been doing really well. Bur oak, cottonwood, I really like. Yes, they can be a nuisance in some situations, but we're also maintaining our stream corridors, so we're planting the trees in a way that we can mow around them. So I don't think we'll have that problem as long as that maintenance program keeps up. But yeah, cottonwoods, they grow super fast, especially in the areas we're planting them in. And tamarack, we've been using a lot of tamarack, and they've been doing really well. Also silver maple and river birch and some hackberry as well is the main species we've been using.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Ed. He wants to know if there's any easements on the upper Galle.
No, there isn't, unfortunately. No. No, there's not a lot of access out there. The Upper Galle, it's hard to get to. It's mostly it's all private land, and there's just a couple road crossings, and even those road crossings you've got to walk pretty far from to get where you need to go. So yeah, no, unfortunately there's no easements up there right now.
Okay, well, can always ask for permission, I guess.
Yep, you can do that.
Yeah. Question from Paul Stoll regarding the new regulations, 5 fish under 12 inches, one over 12 inches. Is that just brown trout, or is it the same true for brooks or a combination of brooks and browns?
Yeah, it's a combo. It's aggregate, so it includes all trout. So brook trout are included in that, but most of the water that regulation is put on is brown trout water. It does include the trips. So yeah, brook trout can be included, but it's mostly brown trout water.
Yeah. Sorry, one editorial comment. If anybody here catches and keeps a brook trout over 12 inches, they they shouldn't post about it on social media. We'll just leave it like that. So sorry. An- Another question. There were a lot of questions about the timber rattler, and they want to know without making the location too specific. Where was that timber rattler seen?
Oh yeah, I'll tell you the location right off the bat. County K on the Little Trimble River. Like the furthest site down, almost to the confluence with the Trimble. And I asked our NHC, our natural heritage biologist, where I told him where this snake was, and apparently right over the ridge is Trenton Bluffs Natural Area where there's a hibernaculum. So he said that's likely where it was from. It was about 1,200 yards as the crow flies from that spot. So yeah, down there close to 35, Highway 35 on the Little Trimble. It was super cool. We almost stepped on it, and it never rattled. It was amazing, beautiful snake.
Yeah, very cool. I think you already answered this question, but we have one more question. I'll ask it one more time. Do you have any concerns with the number of aquatic insects you're seeing in any of the rivers?
Yeah, so I know there's a lot of research that is ongoing and that will come out. I know our research biologist, Matt Mitro, is currently starting up a project looking at insect numbers and neonicotinoids and, the hot topic that's going on right now. So like I mentioned earlier, our water resources staff, they do a really good job monitoring all of those populations. So yeah, we're starting to look into that more and more. And yes, I do have huge concerns. I mean, it's the main forage, for the fish that everybody in this room fishes for. So yeah, huge concerns. So definitely paying attention to the research that's coming out and hopefully, like you mentioned with that event, at the Capitol, I think that's really cool that those things are going on. So hopefully something can change to actually turn this trend around. So yeah, big concerns.
Thank you. And we did have Matt come in and talk about his research
Cool.
on beavers a few months ago, which was great. And I did hear he's working on understanding the effects of neonics. So we'll plan to have Matt come back to talk to our chapter.
Awesome. Yeah, good.
Okay, we had a number of questions about the feral brook trout stocking, and I think the first, based on the questions I'm seeing, could you just one more time explain the difference between, what would I say, wild trout, feral trout, and hatchery trout? And
Sure.
then, yeah,
Yeah, so wild trout, they're just the trout that is in these streams for millennia, which are basically brook trout because they're a native trout species. But like if you think about the rush, we haven't stocked it in a couple decades. The Kinney, some of these streams don't have a history of stocking other than when brown trout were just initially put in there, very limited stocking. So we basically consider those wild trout. And for our brook trout populations, we do genetically test them so we can determine if there are natural heritage strain, wild strain of brook trout. And we have many of those populations within my management area. And we have some that we thought were wild and that actually weren't. They've been influenced by hatchery genetics at some point to the point where it still shows up. Those populations that we don't stock, we are considered wild. And then the feral strain and the domestic strain are our stock strains. So the domestics have been raised in hatchery for decades and decades and decades and propagated. So they've lost likely some of their characteristics to make them successful in the wild. So we don't see those domestic strains generally produce populations that are naturally sustaining. They don't naturally reproduce. Their growth rates are a little bit different. And we're working on quantifying that stuff now and in the near future, especially with brown trout too, because we do produce domestic and feral strain brown trout. So those are the domestics. And then the ferals are fish that are basically the first generation or second generation out of the wild. So to get those fish, we take eggs directly out of the wild, out of genetically tested streams that are wild strain fish. And then we raise those eggs in the hatchery till they become brood stock. And then their first generation that those brood stock produce, some of those are stocked into the streams. And then we'll also raise those for another generation, so that second generation, and those will be stocked into streams across the state as well. So very closely removed from the wild, basically, just pretty much as wild as you can get for fish that are raised in a hatchery. So those are the main differences.
okay, so to summarize, I think what the questions were, basically the theory that you were trying to prove was that these feral fish, which are very close to wild trout, would be able to be successfully introduced into streams, even though hatchery fish were not successfully establishing breeding populations. And then
Yeah,
you also had these control streams just to make sure that there wasn't something else going on.
right, correct. Yep, you nailed it.
Okay. And then so the other question that was related to this then was what theories do you have right now about what may or may not contribute to the successful introduction of feral brook trout into streams? What do you think are the things that help the introduction and what hurts the introduction?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like in my instance, I haven't seen them not be successful. Um, so I honestly couldn't say, what negatively impacts them. They obviously wouldn't survive in a stream, that didn't have the habitat or that was too warm. Um, so yeah, I think the success, like I mentioned with the Upper Galle, even though it does border a warmer, cool water stream, they were still successful. Like we see very high densities of adults, very high densities of young of year, and the habitat's there. So yeah, the habitat, but like I showed, in those three different instances, those three different streams, like the habitat varies so much in those different streams. And we even stocked them into a stream that already has an established brown trout population, and they still did well. So, yeah, as long as the habitat and the water quality is there, they're likely to be successful, just because of their characteristics, because they're basically wild fish that they just lived in the hatchery for their first few months of life. Um, so yeah, that's a really good question. What I really want to do is do an evaluation of domestic stock, like a quantifiable investigation of like domestic stocked fish in other streams and see how successful those were, and then compare that to our feral stocking. So that's kind of my next step that I would like to look at. Um, but yeah, so far, like I only have examples that were successful, so I can't say if they weren't successful, why.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, the eggs that you take out of the stream are already fertilized eggs, right? So it's
So
not crossing a wild egg with a hatchery sperm.
correct. Yeah, but they actually do all that at the stream. So for example, like Katy Creek, our hatchery staff come up from like these eggs were taken down to Nevin in Madison. So our hatchery staff come up, we help shock the fish. They have these big cages that we hold them in until the fish are ready. Um, So they wanted, I think at that point, 250 females and 250 males or something like that. If I'm remembering, this was back in 2018. And then they came up and they spawn the fish at the stream. So they take the eggs and they take the sperm, and then the fish go back in the stream, and then they mix the eggs and sperm and take them back down to Madison and put them in the hatchery and do all their hatchery stuff. So that's kind of how the process works. So it's pretty cool. So we hold those fish in those cages for, sometimes a couple weeks, depending on how close they are to being ready to go. So yeah, it's a cool process. We do it every year in South Fork, the Hay River in northern Dunn County. That's where we get our fish every year for some stocking streams. So yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Uh, Changing the subject, here's a question from Bill Brand. He wants to know if the large brown trout like each other. Do you tend to find multiple large fish in a single pool, or do they spread out and guard their individual territories?
Yeah, I think they do like each other. I'm just like thinking of like the various brown trout that we've got. It's hard to say though with sometimes with our shocking, like as we're shocking, we're going upstream. And when the fish feel the electricity, like if they just, feel a little bit of it, they can feel it before they actually get stunned enough for us to catch them. So sometimes we're pushing fish. So we don't actually know where they were sitting before we got there. But in a lot of cases, you have a pretty good idea of where they're sitting. And sometimes the habitat is just perfect, big brown trout habitat to where it can hold a lot of really large fish. I'm thinking of one, for example, that 27-incher that I showed at the beginning. That it's a huge elongated pool, and it holds a lot of really nice fish. And we know that those fish they have nowhere else to go. So we know that they came from there. So yeah, it depends on the habitat. Again, it's all about habitat. If you have the habitat, it can hold a lot of really, really nice fish, and they'll seem to get along. Lunkers, it seems like one or two large brown trout really like to dominate those structures. So I guess in that case, they probably don't get along. But yeah, depends on the habitat and how much is there and how big it is, that kind of thing. So
Okay, I think this is the last question. There was the question, I guess we have either people who are really interested in snakes or really afraid of snakes, but they're wondering if there are other rivers where timber rattlers may be present.
Yeah, probably any of these streams, especially lower, the closer you get to the Mississippi, bluff country. I know like all those like Maiden Rock, or not Maiden Rock, Morgan Coulee Natural Area. It's down on Morgan Coulee, which is a trip to the lower Rush. I know like a lot of those based on my conversations with our natural heritage conservation biologist, on any of those bluffs or any of those streams that are adjacent to those bluffs going into the Mississippi River, you could probably find a timber rattler potentially. So yeah, after we saw that one, we were very aware of our surroundings. I'll just say that. But it was cool. It was a cool experience.
Okay, Bob, so is that it? The questions online?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks.
We may have time for one or two more questions in the audience if there is some questions. You don't like your prize? Is that your question?
I want to know the person who's planting the cottonwood trees along the rivers. Do they hate fly anglers? And have you ever fished on a June afternoon with all of that cottonwood floating down?
Yep. I know what you're talking about. And it's me. You can blame me. I ordered the trees.
It's the, either the male or the female, it's one or the other,
Right.
so just pick the other one.
Right. Yeah. See if they're boys or girls and then purchase the trees. Yeah, I'm sorry. They grow so fast, like it's insane how fast they grow. Yeah. I know. I know. They love it. They do really well.
Why did you pick that tree?
So yeah, our goal on these, we're really planting them on our brook trout reserve streams. Like that's where we're focusing a lot of our tree planting energy. Because those are streams that should have the ability to hold brook trout into the future under a warming climate, but some of the streams are more challenged than others. So on those streams that are thermally challenged, that's where we're putting the trees back in. So we want to try to get canopy established as quickly as we can, because as we all know how fast oaks grow, it's going to be 20, 30 years before we have a canopy from oak trees and some of the slower growing species. So we don't plant many, but we do plant some to hopefully provide some shade in about 10 or 15 years. So yeah. Yeah. Well, like I mentioned, we're mowing. So we plant these trees 50 feet apart, 20 feet back from the stream so that we can mow around them. So basically our goal with this is like to have a savanna type habitat to where we maintain the understory, which is grass. And then we have these canopy trees. So that's the goal with those, is the savanna type habitat to still provide fishability, but still have shade. So
Is there one more question? If there's no question, that's okay.
yeah, whatever.
No?
Oh, thank you. Great questions. Thank you.
Kasey, present for Kasey tonight. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you for coming. We always enjoy it. There's lots of questions, so that's to prove that we like your talk. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I always enjoy coming here. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the meeting tonight, and you have a great evening. And we'll see you next month. Thank you.
Cool.
Um,
You know, both Wisconsin DNR and Minnesota DNR are encouraging harvesting. Right? What? Are encouraging harvesting, yeah. And what are we doing to help with that? Jack, sure. I kill those kind of fish. Well, yeah, I do the occasional fish and don't catch and don't release. That's what. I don't know if anyone's ever done it. I asked Bob. For CX, like. Encouraging, you know, what do you catch fish on a creek? What do you do with it? You got a creel, how to clean it and how to cook it. Like there's a whole sequence of events, you know.
That's brilliant, because
I can clean them out in the lake and I drop the guts out there and I'm like, okay, no bears. But here, I'm like, what if I want to fish for 2 hours and I caught a 10-inch trout? You know what? These people haven't done it for a million years.
And you know,
They don't, you know, their dads had it for bombs. Right. So anyway, let's say DNR should have like a little video how to do it or something like that. But the big news, but Bob said, the best part, we could have samples of the smoked trout at the meeting.
And I mean, they're just such.
You know what? I was writing notes in myself because I so many fucking to smoke.